Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about a couple different builds that I was trying out that I've seen in the community and I asked for in comments. And so there's two things specifically that stuck out and that I've heard a lot of people talk about, and so I'm going to be talking about Radiant Decree specifically and what I've found with that, and I'm going to be talking about the burn build, which is like Expurgation, Truce Wake, the Exorcism dot, and you can kind of have a burn build with Brett Paladin. In theory, you can. And so we'll be talking about those things. So I am going to be talking about numbers a little bit here. As always, this is beta. Numbers don't matter that much, but they can kind of tell you some things and whatnot. So when I say, this is slightly better, that's just one person testing. Like, I can't do 1,000 dungeons. I can't do 100 dungeons even, right? So I have very limited testing capacity. I can only sit at a training dummy for so long, so it is, it's subject to error, subject to variance, stuff like that, right? But you can learn some details, and it's worth talking about for sure. So just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. So we are going to, I'll talk a little bit about this burn build first. So the burn build would be, you take Exorcism here. We might as well just make it real quick. We would take Expurg, we would take Truce Wake, we would take, you could take Radiant Decree too if you wanted. I know a person in the comments asked too, so there you would take Exorcism, and then you would do whatever, your single target or multi-target. There's no real burn stuff down here, but if you just wanted all the dots, it's an Exorcism dot, a Truce Wake dot, and a Expurg dot. So these are like the dots that you can put on stuff. Technically, you could say that like Incandescence or Touch of Light is kind of a burn too, but these things are tuned horribly as well. So I guess maybe you could say that because it's like passive damage. I guess it's not really a dot, but it's from your consecration, which kind of feels like a burn. So maybe that as well. But that's kind of the story, really. So none of these abilities are actually tuned, right? So you can play with them and see how they feel and how the gameplay might be with them. But none of these abilities are tuned. Exorcism does no damage on the beta. Incandescence and Touch of Light do basically no damage on the beta currently. They're pretty terrible. Um, uh, Bursting Light, yeah. So these abilities do almost no damage. Expurg does almost no damage, and Truce Wake does almost no damage. By no damage, I mean they are, as a talent, for them to be a talent, it's pretty much just completely dead. They don't do anything when there's other talents to take that are just better, right? For example, just like High Lord's Judgment, increasing your judgment damage is just far and away better than any of those burn things. As an example, as the way they are right now, we'd be better off having stat sticks. That being said, right, how is the gameplay? How would a burn gameplay build feel? And in that case, it's actually pretty good. Now, I know the person who suggested this in the comment on the latest video mentioned having Radiant Decree here. However, for the burn build, if you just wanted the burn itself, I mean, you have to take it. So it kind of plays against each other in a way, because you kind of want more Blade of Wrath procs for the Expurg, but at the same time, you need to have this for the Truce Wake. So they do kind of work against each other. I would say that. So you're not getting as much, you're getting a little bit of burn here, a little bit of burn there, I guess you could say. And in the Exorcism, of course, it doesn't feel great to press on single target. Well, it doesn't feel great to press at all because it's not tuned. It doesn't do anything. So maybe it would feel good to press on single target. On multi-target, in theory, it feels good to press because you're putting a dot on everything inside your consecration, and so that causes them to burn more, I guess you'd say. But overall, I think it's a cool idea, and I saw people when this talent tree was first put out saying, "Oh, maybe we could have a Blade of Wrath build," and perhaps a tier set could be based around that. Let's think season 2 or something in in Dragonflight. Sorry, not Shadowlands. A burn build could be possible, especially if they tuned to like a tier set around it. Increases your damage over time, damage by a huge amount or something like that for Ret Paladin. And then all of a sudden this burn build becomes really, really cool and really, really good. And you prioritize those abilities over other abilities. And it kind of changes the gameplay in a fun way. So I think a burn build could be really, really fun. Unfortunately, there's no like real way to test it and test how viable or good it is, because none of those abilities happen to do any damage whatsoever. I have to assume it's a bug because Otherwise, no one would ever pick them because everything's better. Like even so, Seal of Wrath here, this also doesn't do pretty much anything, but it's still like equal or better to these other talents. And so we have many talents that just don't do anything. At least 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. We have like 5 or so talents that pretty much do nothing for the most part, which obviously doesn't feel good. And yeah, and some of them are like even worse than the other ones that do nothing. So without tuning, obviously burn build's dead. With tuning, it could be really fun. I think it might have more of a impact on single target, but then again, you do have Truce Wake burning things. You do have the Exorcism burning things in your consecration. So maybe that's not true. Maybe burn build is a thing, and maybe that idea I put out is actually a good idea if people want to play a burn build. Of course, if they don't, then they'll hate this idea. But if you had a thing where like your damage over time effects do just like an incredible amount more damage, or that would have to be something like that instead of your Blade of Wrath and your Wake or Radiant Decree damage or whatever. Just because you would then just have really boring tier sets again. Whereas if you focused on the damage over time aspect and made it a very high amount, it would actually completely change your gameplay and possibly even in a fun way. So that's my thoughts on the burn build. Unfortunately, like I said, not a lot to talk about with it other than just gameplay and theory crafting and stuff like that, which is really fun. But nothing hardline there. It's just my message feedback there for Blizzard is just please make these abilities tuned to do some sort of damage so we can actually try them out or see if they're worth playing or whatever. Or maybe they just picture a few of the talents just being these really, really, really small modifiers, and they don't ever intend on having there to be like a burn build. That could be, completely possible as well. Let's talk about Radiant Decree now. This is going to be a little bit more of an interesting discussion in my opinion, because I think Radiant Decree, since it is tuned to do damage, you can kind of play with it a little bit more and kind of see more potential in it, like right offhand. So I actually got to run Radiant Decree in Mythic Plus dungeons to test it out as well. Whereas the burn build I just did on the target dummy, one because they took down Mythic Plus dungeons before I was able to get back on and test that out, and two because I already knew it didn't do damage, but I did kind of want to just feel how it played, so I did do it. But as far as Radiant Decree goes, I got to do some dungeons with it. And I also did some target dummy with it for single target because it's important to note what it does on single target as well. So what I found was for multi-target, so for dungeon, it was a slight increase in damage over having Ashes to Dust, right? So now at the beginning of beta, I tested out as well. Now this is before the Art of War nerfs, and Ashes to Dust was definitely better. But with the Art of War nerfs and us getting less procs on our Ashes to Dust just in general, Radiant Decree is slightly better from a numbers perspective, right? And obviously it kind of feels cool to play too, which is also good. It's slightly better from a numbers perspective. I'll get into a bonus perhaps for that as well. So it's slightly better from a numbers perspective, and it's a kind of a fun ability to play around as well. It goes really good after Divine Toll with the Judgment targets and it consuming Judgment debuffs. At least in theory, I'm not sure if it consumes all of them. I wasn't able to test that by tabbing really quick to all the targets, although maybe I should have at least attempted to do that. But it's a very cool and fun ability to use. And now that, Ashes, but I don't want Ashes to Dust to be nerfed is the problem. If they revert Art of War nerfs in any way, they would need to increase the damage of Radiant Decree to make it then, more powerful. I think for AoE in general, my takeaway is, and I say AoE and not single target, I think in general, Radiant Decree damage has to be increased for AoE, and so reduce damage after 5 targets, maybe they could increase that to 7, maybe they can increase that to 10 or something like that. Doing that would make it just much better for Mythic Plus and a kind of like an obvious option for that kind of content, and much better. And that also wouldn't hurt the single target aspect of it. The single target aspect of it is interesting because you can also take this for single target and does a lot of damage. It's a spender. It is just a little bit, and it's not a ton better than Wake Reset in a Mythic Plus dungeon either, but it is better. generally speaking, in pretty much all cases. I guess if you're pulling gigantic, like absolutely gigantic, like mythic, MDI style, maybe not, but for like 2 or 3 packs at a time, which is what my groups were pulling, Radiant Decree was a little bit better. For single target though, Radiant Decree is still really strong, but it's not quite as strong as like a pure single target build. So if you just, fill out the single target stuff, you have all the single target talents, Radiant Decree is not quite as good as, casting Templar's Verdicts. Now it is close. So if you increase Radiant Decree's damage flatly, it would all of a sudden become like your single target spender as well. And then you would just kind of have this one spender that you always want to spend, which can be interesting because it's on a 15-second cooldown. So you'd be weaving it in as like this power ability. And I don't hate that at all, but it does kind of take away from, your single target abilities, enhancing your stats on those things. Now, what's interesting though is because since it's just barely behind a normal single target build, when you're in a dungeon, you don't have these single target talents taken, and so it actually then becomes equal or better to your Templar's Verdict on single target, and so it actually becomes a very good single target thing to use. Like when you're on the bosses and stuff like that, it's just a powerful spender. It becomes like just your best spender overall, regardless of whether it's single target or multi-target. And so that's kind of cool for a dungeon setting, and I found that to be quite interesting as well. So my final takeaways for Radiant Decree are, again, I would increase the damage reduced target. So right now it's damage reduced beyond 5 targets. I would increase that to 7 or 10 or something like that, which will then increase its overall AoE damage. And so it does more damage for AoE. It becomes more of an obvious dungeon choice, or a boss that has a bunch of ads and stuff like that. Becomes more of an obvious choice there, and just a really, really good choice. And then I wouldn't touch it at all for single target, because I don't really want to play Radiant Decree in single target. I think there's some cool things that could come with that. With a burn build, for example, since you can cast it every 15 seconds, if Truce Wake actually did something, for example, that could be kind of cool. So if like they ever did a burn build with that set bonus I was hypothesizing, apparently I can't talk earlier, if they ever did something like that, then that could be a pretty cool option for single target then. But as things stand now, I would like to see this be kind of like a dungeon ability or a multi-target ability. And I think to like really set it over the top and really make it feel fun to press, you would want to increase the number of targets that it hits at max damage. I think that's my main takeaway with it there. So Radiant Decree, lower the amount of targets, or increase the target cap, whatever you want to call it, for Radiant Decree. For burn build, the talents need to be tuned if you ever want them to be taken whatsoever. Well, that's Expurg, Exorcism, Truce Wake, etc. If you want these talents to be taken or ever used, you're going to need to tune them in a way that makes them feel somewhat meaningful, and not only just augmenting like your Blade of Wrath. I think what they do is they look at your Blade of Justice damage, and then they see, okay, this is increasing it by 1% or something like that, and that's how we want it to be. But the reality is we want the Expurg damage to actually like do something and actually be a meaningful talent, and that's just not where they are right now with it. That could just be the case. But I'd like to see that be the case. I'd like to see it be a case where it's like, oh, this talent actually does something, much like Wake of Ashes is a talent that does something. We have many talents that actually do things. Final Verdict does something. Final Reckoning does something. Divine Toll does something. Now those are all down a lot lower, but Wake of Ashes is in the same area. High Lord's Judgment does something to your judgment, like noticeable. It makes a good difference. 16% more, not like 1% more on an ability. And you're using judgment as much as you possibly can with Zealot's Paragon. So you're really increasing your judgment damage by a lot. So I would like to see it more along those lines. Like the Expurg damage should increase your Blade of Justice damage by like 16% or something, like High Lord's Judgment does. Something like that is what I'd like to see there as far as tuning goes. So I promise I make this video testing out new builds. You can always ask me to try things, and I will try them. Dungeons apparently are going to be sketchy to get into just because of them taking them on and off the beta. But raid testing is always a possibility as well, and I do not mind hitting target dummies from time to time for an hour or so at a time, and testing some things out that way. So you can always suggest builds. I won't always make videos on them. But what I'm hoping to see this week is maybe some more tuning passes. I mean, that's probably what we are going to see every week is tuning passes. So maybe they can tune these talents a little bit more, get all the talents working properly, and then truly test them out. That would be fun to do this week. So that's where I'm at right now. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. That helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.